We begin in the world's largest economy, the United States. For months, households there were forced to bear the weight of an uninterrupted streak of rapid and monthly consumer price hikes. Petrol, or gasoline as they call it in the States, had risen to record levels due to the crisis in Ukraine. Food got more expensive also because of Russia and Ukraine, two of the world's leading exporters of wheat and fertilizer. And the cost of cars and electronics surged because of post-pandemic supply chain bottlenecks. But in July, US consumers finally got some relief. Now, US consumer prices rose 8.5% last month compared to the same period last year. That's still historically elevated, but it was slower than June's increase of more than 9%, which was the highest in more than 40 years. Compared to the previous month, inflation was flat at 0%, eliciting some cheers from the White House.
We received news that our economy had 0% inflation in the month of July. 0%. Here's what that means. While the price of some things went up last month, the price of other things went down by the same amount. The result, zero inflation last month, but people were still hurting, but zero inflation last month.
Across the Pacific in China, rising inflation has been a lot less severe. Consumer prices there rose just 2.7% in July. That's the highest in 2 years, but still much lower than what other major economies have been reporting. The problem for Beijing is that moderate price increases are a symptom of overall weakness in the economy. Youth unemployment in the Asian giant stands at 20%, and it's rising. Job creation there has slowed due to multiple lockdowns that have paralysed parts of the country for months at a time.
During my first year as a postgraduate, the situation was okay. I learned about some jobs, though it was not very urgent for me. The general situation then was stable. The employers didn't cut positions, and they were still hiring. But upon my graduation, the companies that had interviewed me told me they cut positions and they stopped hiring. There were 2 companies that told me so.
The Chinese economy is moving forward, but there are always uncertainties in the market. In the future, we will be faced with technology challenges and the challenges of internal and external factors. The uncertainties of the labor market will keep existing and even increase. So for university students, the most important thing is the ability to adapt. That is to adapt to the environment of uncertainties and to cope with the uncertainties with your solid skills.
Well, let's get more on this now with Joseph Foudy in New York. He's an economics professor at the NYU Stern School of Business. Good to have you back with us, Joseph. A collective sigh of relief from consumers, the markets, and, of course, the Biden administration after inflation in the US climbed down from that 40-year high. I'll start with a big question. Has the US passed peak inflation?
Yeah, I think so, particularly with the decline in global energy prices, which passes on to food as well. We see that sort of headline rates are really coming down. Having said that, the core inflation rate is still around 6%, and it's going to take some time to bring that down. We really need to reset expectations, particularly around wages.
As we know, the US Federal Reserve has been aggressively raising interest rates in order to rein in the rise in consumer prices. Do you think it should start to pivot away from that hawkish stance, or is it too early for that right now?
I think it's still too early for that. I think this reduces some pressure on the Fed, but they clearly don't want to declare victory prematurely. And so I think we're still going to see continued rate rises over the next year, but you're not going to see something like a 100 basis point rate rise anytime soon.
And we know that the US economy has suffered 2 consecutive quarters of contraction, which means it's technically in recession, even though one hasn't been declared. Firstly, do you believe that the US is in recession right now? And secondly, do the latest inflation figures put it further away from potentially another quarter of contraction?
Yeah, so I don't believe we're in a recession at all. I think that this is ultimately going to be a sort of a correction in the data. We had record job postings, over 500,000 jobs in the last month. And, but for the fact that, we're raising rates to rein in inflation, the U.S. economy actually looks quite healthy.
And can I ask you about the US biggest rival now, China, because we know that it's reported, its own record inflation, even though it really is a fraction of what other major economies are experiencing. Should the world be worried about rising consumer prices in China?
So I'd argue, ironically, the opposite. The Chinese rates should be higher. The fact that they're so low compared to the rest of the world is showing us the cost of these lockdowns. They also have significant risks in the real estate sector now that weigh on us. So it sounds ironic, but I'd be rooting for this kind of inflation or slightly higher in China today, just because the rest of the world is looking at 7 or 8% inflation across the board.
So do you think that the latest figures out of China would put further pressure on authorities to perhaps ease its zero COVID policy stance that really has shut down large parts of the economy, including in Beijing and Shanghai?
Yeah, so economically, this is proving quite costly, but obviously it's a political decision. And with a major sort of leadership conference and changes in the fall, I don't think anybody's expecting any significant change until later this year or really the start of 2023.
Okay, Professor Joseph Foudy, we will have to leave it there, but it's really good to get your analysis as always. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.